winds, cross winds, big swirling winds. And I look at usually, we'll talk to Kevin later, but 10 miles an hour or more, 15 miles an hour or more. It makes it much harder to move the chains. And why? Because when it's super windy out and you're a quarterback and you're going to throw a seam pass or, a deep pass, the ball might sail way over or go way under or be pushed out of bounds. So it's harder to throw the ball when it's windy. That's pretty obvious here. And today we're going to talk about a lot of theories just because it makes sense in your head. You got to make sure that it's proven within the data overall. So it's harder to throw the ball when it's windy. It's going to be harder to move the chains. Also, when it's harder to throw the ball, you're going to run it more. And when you run the ball, you chew up more of the clock. So that's going to also help an under. And then also with kicks, you see a lot of kicks that go wide left, wide right, missed field goals, missed extra points. So long story short, wind, and we'll get to it in baseball in a second, but can have a huge impact on football, specifically when it comes to winds that are 10 miles an hour or more. This is a great stat since 2003, according to BetLab Sports. When the wind is 10 miles an hour or more in an NFL game, the under is 56%. And you got to remember that 52.38% number is breaking even with minus 110 juice. So 56%. Pretty good here. So always look at the wind first. That's kind of the easiest, most basic factor to look at, specifically when betting a total.
Okay, great start here with weather and the impact. Let's stick with the NFL. We'll get to baseball here in a second. So again, just for the viewer, benchmark 10 miles an hour. Is that pretty much where you start as far as the standard?
To me, that's the standard. Yeah, anything you can get higher than that, obviously, is going to have even more of an impact. I think when you get to like 5 mile an hour or less, yeah, it's better than nothing, but it's going to have kind of a negligible impact overall. And I think the other side of this is that you also look at we're going to talk today about weather. It's all about looking for extreme scenarios where it's super windy or it's really, really hot or it's really, really cold. That's what you kind of want to look for overall. But we'll also talk about looking at domes. The opposite of a windy game is if it's a perfect game played inside a dome. And when you look at domes or retractable roof stadiums, perfect conditions for the offense. It's a fast track. It basically benefits the offense over the defense. So you see dome unders around 52.5%, whereas a non-dome under is about 50%. So that's kind of the opposite trend.
At Josh_insights. Remember, sign up for the daily newsletter. Josh is prominent there. Just go to vsin.com, enter your email address, and you'll get it. Okay, it's vsin.com. Remember that. It is the everything guide to sports betting here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. I'm Patrick Meagher, live from Vegas. The author of the everything guide to sports betting is Josh Appelbaum. We're going comprehensive as far as weather and the impact on sports and your wagering. I did have a follow-up. We just went through wind in the NFL. Let's transition now as far as wind and baseball. A lot of this comes down to the positioning of, the actual park and the topography. For example, you're always looking at the wind when it comes to Wrigley on the north side there in Chicago, not as much on the south side. So let's start just comprehensive overview of wind and the impact when betting baseball, Josh.
Yeah, so wind in football is really all about betting a lot of unders, but wind in baseball can have a big effect for both totals to the over and to the under. So you got to kind of think of it this way. If it's a really windy day, and you're right, Patrick, look at the kind of the geography of where the field is located. Wrigley Field is kind of your perfect go-to example here, but it's also wind speed and wind direction, more importantly. So basically, when you look at wind, it's one of two ways. You can have crosswinds left, right, but really if it's blowing in, that's a big benefit to an under. Why? Because, if you see a guy hit basically a hit that may be a home run, it might go in the first row of the stands, that wind could knock it down and make it a warning track fly ball out. So it's an out instead of run scored. Now on the opposite side, you could have a really windy day where the wind is howling out to dead center field. And as a result, a warning track fly ball gets pushed into a first row home run. So that's really, really critical when you're looking at baseball. I think also another factor to look at is, sources when you're talking about weather. So a couple of obvious ones, weather.com or AccuWeather. And especially you'll see like with a total in baseball, a Cubs game might open with a total of, 9.5 because the wind is blowing out. But then maybe the temperature instead of 15 mile or the wind 15 miles an hour out, now it's 20. So now the total goes up to 10.5. With a lot of these windy spots, you want to kind of jump on them early because they can really move a ton kind of once the public finds out about this crazy weather, and then they're going to bet into it. But a lot of times at a bad number after it's moved.
Okay, great start. Let's go NFL and Major League Baseball as far as controlled climates in a dome, Josh.
Yeah, so kind of mentioned this at the outset a little bit, but this is kind of the opposite of it. When it's really, really windy in the NFL and college, especially, we'll talk about temperature in a minute. that can really affect the total, specifically the under. In baseball, you're looking at the over or the under, depending on kind of the speed and the direction. But the opposite of this is there's kind of a yin and a yang. If it's crazy weather outside, it's also perfect weather when you're being played indoors. So a lot of times in the NFL, there is a big or a decent advantage to betting an over when you're inside a dome. Kind of a classic example would be the Superdome. When you're looking at the Saints, it seems like they're always scoring a million points there. So basically, when you're playing indoors, it's perfect conditions. It's perfect conditions that really benefit the offense because you got a slick track. No grass, no mud, no wind or temperature or anything, and perfect temps overall, maybe 65, 70 degrees. But as a result, big advantage to the offense because when they're calling a play, they know where they're going. The defense has to react. So basically, when you're looking at totals, a little bit of a 2% advantage to an over in a dome for NFL games. But baseball is really undervalued as well because when you look at dome or closed roof stadiums, one that comes to mind for me is Tropicana Field when you're talking about the Tampa Bay Rays. That's the type of stadium where it really benefits an under because it's perfect conditions for the pitcher, also for the fielders. And as a result, the ball really doesn't take and it doesn't fly and it doesn't really get pushed up into the jet stream and hit a home run. So you do see a big advantage there with dome unders, about 3% more often to the under than outdoors. So you got to think of it one of two ways with extremes, either perfect conditions that can benefit an under in baseball in a dome and over in football, but also extreme conditions outside, which can really typically benefit an under in the NFL or depending on the direction of the wind, an over or under in baseball.
Okay, Josh, you mentioned NFL dome overs hitting at a 51% clip and then non-dome overs in the NFL hitting at 49.6. So again, we understand the fast track, it benefits offense, and there is a discrepancy there. But we're trying to get the principles and help the better understand. When we say that number is baked in, okay, we have to talk about that. The bookmaker is going to take into account, obviously, that this is in a dome. So that is going to be baked into the total. Can you explain to the better what that means?
Yeah, so first off, I would say when you look at specific weather factors or dome, non-domes, you got to remember that the odds makers know all this. They know all this. They've
Right.
taken this into account. They've shaded these lines or adjusted these lines based on those factors. So, yeah, we're talking about domes, 51% to the over, non-dome in the NFL, 49.6%. Both are losing. So you got to remember 52.38 is your magic number. So you're still losing if you're betting an over in a dome, but it does have about a 2% advantage to a non-dome over. So again, these are baked into the cake. Don't think that you know something that the odds makers don't. And there are other factors that go into it. Like, I like to look at betting systems, and you can layer in things like in a dome, a non-conference game, because the lack of familiarity benefits the offense. Maybe when the total is, 45 or less to the over, a lower end total. So you can layer on different factors overall. But I just kind of think what you want to keep in mind is that there are these little advantages one way or another. Doesn't mean you want to blindly bet a game because of it, but you want to make sure you're aware of it and you're taking it into account, but knowing that, again, it's nothing that the odds makers don't know that you do know.
Yeah, great explanation, Josh. I just want to again, a lot of brand new bettors joining us here on the Everything Guide to Sports Betting and VSiN all the time. We get emails, we get your messages all the time. I'm brand new. What does this mean? When you see a dome and you see an NFL game, you look at the total. We don't want you just running out and automatically betting the over. That is going to be baked in. Okay, wind, controlled environments. Now let's talk about temperature.
Yeah, temperature can have a huge impact. And, when we were all kids growing up and, out at recess or playing outdoors, when it was a really hot day or a really cold day, it can have an effect, but not always in the way that you think. So, one system that I really like and really lean on a lot, and you see this really often in college football in September, early October, late August, those summer months when it's really, really hot. And you have a lot of these teams that are playing in the South where it's even hotter. So what I look at is kind of a magic number to me when you're looking at college football overs is when it's 85 degrees or higher. And this is a great system that's year over year, pretty consistent. The over is almost 55%, which again,
Wow.
you got to remember realistic expectations. Yeah, big advantage there, Patrick, to the over. So when you're looking at two teams, they're playing in Texas or Alabama or Mississippi or Florida, especially early on when you can really take advantage of kind of high scoring games in general. This is a big trend to the over. So thought process again again, the defense gets tired. The offense really torches the defense. There's a big advantage overall. So that's just one little system there. When it's really hot, you got to remember the defense is gassed. They're gagging for air. They want some Gatorade. The offense is pumped and they're ready to score. So you see a lot of high scoring games when it's really hot out in college football.
Okay, let's go to the other side there. How about when it's cold, NFL?
Yeah, so with a lot of these weather systems, I think they make a ton of sense up front. Wind blowing out, probably going to turn a fly ball into a homer. It's really windy, you're going to miss kicks. But you can't always take kind of conventional wisdom for granted because there's systems where it might be opposite of what you think. So a good example would be cold overs in the NFL. And Michael Lombardi and Patrick, we've talked about this a bunch in the NFL, how a lot of people think when it's really cold out, you see a game, in the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field, and you see the kind of the steam coming out of the face mask. You think, man, it is so cold out there. They just want to get off the field and get to that, that bench that's warm and kind of take a break. And their hands are freezing; they can't throw the ball. So what do you think? You think, oh, that leads to a lot of low-scoring games. But actually, it's kind of the opposite. And this is also taking advantage of public overreaction because a great system here would be when the temperature in the NFL is 30 degrees or less, the over is actually 57.1% since 2003. So that it seems counterintuitive, but it makes a lot of sense. When you're out there, it doesn't affect you as much as you think, and the public can kind of overvalue things when there really may not be a lot of data behind it. So again, a lot of these things we're going to talk about today are pretty obvious, but you got to keep in mind there are these little things that when you do your research, you can find, okay, wow, it's overvalued. This also shaded lines. If it's a game at Lambeau Field, Bears Packers, it's 25 degrees, and maybe the odds makers set the total, okay, it should be 45. We're going to set it at 43 because we know the public is just going to take that under, thinking it's going to be a 17-10 game. You can now get kind of inflated, kind of contrarian overs going the other way. But that's just one factor where it may not actually be what you think. So you got to do your research with each scenario.
Okay, that's great. That's temperature. Let's focus on Denver here with the Broncos and, of course, the Rockies. Altitude. We have to talk about this.
Yeah, altitude can have a huge impact on a game, Patrick. And I think really the advantage is basically what teams are used to it and what teams are not used to it. If you ever travel to Colorado, you can definitely feel it when you get off the plane, the rarefied air. It's a little bit harder to breathe. So when you're the Denver Broncos, or you have a lot of college teams in Colorado, the Buffaloes, they're used to it. So it's not going to impact them as much as maybe a team that only goes out to Colorado, once a year for a game or once every couple of years. So the altitude can have a huge impact, and basically that can provide a big advantage to a home team like the Broncos against a team that, maybe it's an even game early, but maybe it's tied late, and then really that's when the opponent really just kind of gets run over late because the Broncos are used to it. The other team is not. They kind of hit a wall overall. And then we also talk about altitude in baseball. It can have a huge impact.
We're having some connectivity issues there with Josh.
Like
I
8.5, maybe 9.
Pull Josh down just for a second here. The Denver equation, I don't even know if most really think about it, but in particular, as far as football is concerned, a big time, that altitude starts to catch up to teams in the second half specifically. Remember, here on the Everything Guide to Sports Betting, we're going to talk about the fact that this isn't static, right? So weather isn't static. So when you go into your in-game wagering opportunities, there's some really good ways you can kind of circumvent the weather and add it to your arsenal as far as betting concerned. That second half bet in Denver amongst me and my friends, that's always something we're looking at as far as Denver being used to the altitude and teams traveling there to Denver just simply not. That's just the way it works. And as far as altitude is concerned in Colorado, there at Coors Field, one thing I do want to make note of is you're going to consistently look down and see the totals as far as baseball is concerned. And you're always going to, especially when it starts to get hot, especially when we get into those dog days, traditionally, you're going to look and you're going to see Colorado and Coors Field, those numbers are going to be elevated. Okay. That goes back to the idea and the principle that the books bake that in. Okay. So you understand this, but the ball specifically when it was juiced last year is going to jump out of Coors, but you're going to see totals get into 12.5 and 13. So we bring Josh Appelbaum back in. I was just talking about the idea, the altitude there as far as the Denver Broncos and having an advantage oftentimes in the second half. and then also that number being baked in as far as the total and betting on the Rockies.
Yeah, Patrick, that's a great point. I think another thing you want to look at it is, you mentioned it, weather isn't static. You might have 15-mile-an-hour winds, the first hour of the game, but they may die down to 10 mile an hour or 5 mile an hour later in the game. So this is when you maybe want to isolate, okay, I don't really love the full game under 45 in an NFL game, but I really like it for the first half. It's a lower number, but again, that's when the wind is really going to impact it. And again, when you're looking at other things, like another thing someone taught me a long time ago is to look at the shadows when you're looking at baseball games.
Yep.
Specifically, you always remember like the Dodgers or the Giants. If it's like a 4 o'clock game Eastern or 4 o'clock late afternoon, and the shadows are kind of creeping, where it has a huge advantage for the pitchers because the batters have a really their sight line is all screwed up. It's harder for them to pick up the ball. So you see a lot of those late afternoon shadow games between the pitcher's mound and home plate can really benefit an under. So you can look at a first 5 under, which is basically your first half under in baseball through the first 5 innings. So these are the things you want to look at. You may get lucky where it's 15 mile an hour the entire game. But again, weather's crazy. It can change. And as a result, you want to try to put yourself in the strongest position possible to make your bet when the weather is at the most extreme overall.
And that's a great point about Dodger Stadium, where those shadows really come into play. And again, topography comes into play here. You can do the research. You can find which parks are heavily affected by those shadows. And again, first 5 betting, oftentimes you can take advantage of that. Now, let's just take a step back when talking about weather and applying it to your wagering as far as how you prepare for this, looking ahead, etc.
Yeah, so I think the important thing, Patrick, is to always kind of anticipate situations, look ahead, where you don't want to wake up and maybe it's 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and you realize, oh, it's really windy at Wrigley Field today. You want to ideally look the night before, kind of do your research and put yourself in the best position possible, because just if you realize that, okay, it's a really windy situation, that's great. But if you waited too long and it opened at 9.5 and now it's at maybe the wind's blowing in, the line's down to 9 or 8.5. Maybe it lands on 9, where if you hit it early, you would have cashed. So I think that's really important, depending on the over or the under. And then I'll also look at situations, Patrick, like in New England. I'm from New England. You're a week out from a Patriots game, and you might get a forecast that says we're going to get a foot of snow, crazy winds, crazy rain, everything sleet, and then it clears up, and by the time you get to Saturday, it's kind of like a perfect day. So it's kind of a yin and a yang. You want to anticipate this, but you also don't want to bet things too far out, because weather can change overall. But pretty easy go-to resources, AccuWeather, Weather Channel, weather.com. These are the sort of things you want to lean on, and also cross-reference multiple sources, on-the-ground reporting, local reporting. That can really help you to make the smartest bet that you can.
Yeah, and we're going to have Kevin Roth, a meteorologist who works for Roto Grinder Sports Betting. It's a tremendous site to bookmark and always use when it comes to the forecast. We just have a minute here. I think it's important, and we're going to have a quiz at the end of the show here on the Everything Guide. But